Well, hello, tubers and tubettes and crazy people. It's the old dog coming at you with another old dog. This is his wife just laughed at him. This is Lawrence Stash Wagner. And Lawrence is, I've seen Lawrence has lived here in Dumaguete for 2 years, and I've been enjoying his music. There's different venues here in town where you can go on a Wednesday night or a Sunday or whatever, and along with some other guys, Stash gets up, plays guitar, and sings. And I've always enjoyed the music that he makes. The guys all kind of get together and play for free. It's a labor of love, if you will. But what I did not know up until recently is that this gentleman here, he's been a professional musician his entire life. And he wrote a song called Don't Bogart Me, also known as Don't Bogart That Joint. And that was 50 years ago, correct?
Am I that old?
And it was also one of the songs that was on a movie that recently had its 50th anniversary called Easy Rider. That was with Dennis Hopper, Jack Nicholson, and Peter Fonda. And what happened was, I'll let him tell you the story, but the gist of it is this. Stash started smoking pot at 15. Okay. And that just was part of the generation, right? You grew up in the 60s, the 50s.
Right in Hollywood.
You're right in the middle of Hollywood, and that's just what people did, boys and girls. Sorry for the honest truth. But then progressively got more and more into the music, started up with a band. And why don't you tell them a little bit about the band, who was in it, the name of it, and how that song, the genesis, if you will, of that song.
Well, Fraternity of Man was put together actually by two people. Elliot Ingber, who was the lead guitar player for Frank Zappa in Mothers of Invention. When he left Frank, he decided to put this new band together. The other person who was important was Vito, and nobody can pronounce his last name, but he was an artist in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And he also had a dance troupe of freaks that used to follow my band around. Before my band, they followed Frank Zappa's band.
Frank Zappa, right.
So, anyway, they put this band together. And I saw Elliot play, and the first time I saw him play, I had never seen anyone play with that much passion. I'd never seen anybody put music to life the way he did, and I wanted to get next to him. So I became the roadie in the band.
Gotcha. So after a period of time, Stash was the roadie, and they would bring him up on stage, and you'd sing a little bit, and then...
Well, Elliot and I started writing songs together, and then he'd call me up on stage and say, hey, sing these songs, and I did.
Here's what and so at that time, you were running around with people and associating with a lot of big names that are huge today, and you had kind of this golden era, if you will, between the age of about 16 till you were about 27. Am I correct? Have I got that figured out?
28, 29.
28, 29. Okay, so just, approaching 30. And had a hit record. The hit record was in the movie. And
the hit record was in 5 movies.
It was in 5 movies. And so money was coming in, right? And at the time, you weren't really paying attention to the money, were you?
Absolutely not.
And I asked you, where did the money go? Right up his nose.
Yeah, when I died, my wife was going to take my nose.
This is a little
to the
60s flashback. Okay? So, it's interesting. I mean, you had neighbors like Linda Ronstadt.
Yeah, but you got to understand, these weren't big stars.
No,
at the time.
that's my point. Is that
these were my friends.
These were just people starting out.
Right.
They didn't have albums. They didn't have contracts or anything like that.
Well,
I mean,
Linda
like
did.
Frank Zappa and those guys were already on their way. But you were at Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Those guys were coming along. Linda Ronstadt, Jackson Browne used to hitchhike up around where you were living. So we can sit here and name drop all day long. And some of the people went off to become, megastars. Other people had one-hit wonders. Other people.
Why do you point at me when you go one-hit wonders?
We're going to get back to that. But here's the cool thing, is that when I lost my train of thought.
I do that to people.
That's what happens when old guys talk, So, hey, we were talking about Linda Ronstadt and all that. Oh, but then you got into cocaine.
Later, yeah.
Okay, all right. But there's just, truth in lending here. We're come from an era of the 50s and the 60s, and we were talking about kind of like your golden years, if you will, or your big years. And that's when you were starting out, and you were starting out with a lot of these people. And a lot of these people ended up dead, for one thing.
Yeah.
Other people became big stars, is I think where I was going with that. Other people had the one-hit wonders.
Or big stars and dead, like Jim Morrison.
Yes, correct. And then there were guys that invested their money, like who did you say it was? The Eagles? Chicago. Their manager invested their money for them, and they've got mega dollars. But most of you guys didn't take care of your money. You trusted the wrong guy. And I always heard horror stories about bands and artists and actors and child actors being taken advantage of.
They're only horror stories if the people are sitting there going, poor me. I've got such a poor me story. If you wanted to hear it, I don't even want to tell it. There's millions of dollars that have passed through in my name. Mm-hmm. And I don't have millions of dollars to show for it today, right, as you know. But I don't feel bad about my life and what it was, because back then it was marijuana and psychedelia. Mm-hmm. It was, the mm-hmm. acid and
not to mention the group of people that you're running around with. I mean, that was something where the drug culture really permeated. And you were right in the thick of it. So you were on stage, you were performing, you had a hit record, and the hit record was in a hit movie called Easy Rider, and all of these things were coming on. So stuff was coming at you pretty easy at that juncture. But
things that were everyday stuff, like for instance, I got together with Jimi Hendrix. Mm-hmm. Jimi Hendrix taught me a lot about how to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. Because he said, Stash, there are no wrong notes, there are only wrong ways of playing it. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, you can learn a whole lot about the spiritual aspect of music. These things happen on every day. Me playing with Jimmy, we worked in the studio 2 times, once live. These experiences were more important than the money that you're talking about.
Understood.
Many of the things that I did in the studio, I couldn't put my name on the album because I was signed to a different record company.
Right.
So the money had to be handed under the table to me,
yeah,
for session work.
Right.
These are everyday things that we did projects, we worked together because we all encouraged each other.
And so anyway, you guys were playing as artists, you played because you loved to play. Right. And the money was secondary. Yeah, the managers were giving you some money to get a house or buy a car and keep you satisfied. But at the end of the day, they were putting the majority of it in their pocket. A lot of them.
Yeah.
Because you told me the Peter Tork story.
Right.
So Peter Tork was a guy that was in a band called the Monkees, for those that remember. And he had tons of money coming in, correct?
And he should have had tons of money.
He had tons, or what seemed to be like tons of money coming in. And he bought a yacht, I think you said, for David Crosby. Mm-hmm. And we could name drop all day long here. But at the end of the day, he thought he had the money, but the manager really had the money. He thought he bought a house, but he ended up renting a house and didn't know it because he just wasn't savvy. He was an artist and he trusted the guy with the dough, right? And so here's one of the nicest guys on the planet, according to you, because you knew him personally, was Peter Tork of the Monkees. And Peter Tork is where now?
Well, he's dead, but
I didn't know that.
Sorry to take you on that one.
Yeah.
Many people that I worked with, many people I knew, Janis Joplin, I had mentioned, the Doors earlier,
Sure.
Jim. All of these people that came through my life for a season and then died, it didn't really affect me a whole lot. It was just all part of this movie I was living.
Right. It was a season.
It was a season.
It was a season. And so what I was impressed with, and then we'll move on to a couple other things, but Eric Clapton came in one time and you were playing a slide guitar. And Eric Clapton, one of the greatest guitarists in the world, I would say, asked you for advice. And that's how humble he was. I mean, that's how pure he is with his music.
Well, let me clarify that. He didn't ask me for advice. He saw he heard what I was doing. He was recording next door. So he heard what I was doing and he came in and he asked me, can you show me how you did that? And we sat down for about 15 minutes during my session.
Honest.
And I showed him.
So who gave you your first line of cocaine?
David Bowie.
My hero.
Yeah.
That's the guy that I follow. Okay. So when I heard that, I was really impressed.
He was a big marijuana snob.
So we grew up in that culture. Now, the funny thing is I never liked smoking pot. I tried it and didn't care for it. The cocaine.
That's why you like David. That's the way David felt.
That was a little different story for me. But you, so that was the season of your life where you were young, you were in a band, you were popular, things were going good, money was coming in, you're living large, and then there was times change, music changes. And then so you kind of got out of the limelight a little bit, if I understand you correctly. And you started doing more like session work and things like that. You did some acting, you were on some TV shows.
Yeah.
You stayed in the show business.
Right.
And you made money and it was coming in. And then you had an accident.
I did.
And can you tell the folks a little bit about the accident?
I was riding my Harley and some girl decided to run a red light while talking on her cell phone, of course, and T-boned me and put me in the hospital for just about a month, a little under a month. My ankle bone had been totally shattered and it's been replaced with titanium, which is another thing my wife's going to take to the pawn shop when I die, because that was $400,000.
Yeah, that's worth a few bucks.
I don't know used if they're worth much, but anyway, so yeah, that was my accident, and I had to learn how to walk again.
So there's another season.
There was, yeah.
And
yeah.
what was your age at that time?
I didn't, we talked about this earlier. I didn't really think of ages, but we're looking at about 20 years ago.
Okay, so you were in your early 50s. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward to where he's gone through the season of being in the limelight, having a hit record, partying with rock stars, doing all that good stuff, experimenting with drugs, and then sort of segued into getting gigs, doing some acting on TV, in movies, still earning money off of the one hit, the Don't Bogart Me, right?
It's always been consistently selling. It's
interesting because it's 50 years old, and this just trips me out, is that one song that was in 5 movies, but the one that resonates with me is Easy Rider, because I remember seeing it at the drive-in. But it still generates for you an income. And then one really interesting thing that Stash had told me was that he started to look online at places and realized that he had been, because he was in the band, he had been touring. And he had been all around the world and not seen anything. Because when you're in a band or an act like you were, you would get on a plane or a bus and you would travel to a hotel, and then you'd go from the hotel to the venue. You would do your act, and then it was from there you went back to the hotel. Either you slept or you partied or whatever you did, and then it was back into a bus or another plane and on to the next location. So you never got around the block. You know, you didn't see anything. You went everywhere and saw nothing except the inside of a hotel room, and hotel rooms start to all look alike after a while. And pretty soon I got to figure venues start to all look alike after a while. And so the view never changed. You had this real close-knit group of people that I assume were kind of like family at that time. And you spent all your time, energy, emotions with them. And then when the accident came, then that changed. And then when the accident occurred, it gave you a lot of downtime. And you told me that you realized you'd been all around the world and you hadn't seen anything. So what Stash did was he sold his house at the age of about 51, something like that, had $40,000, and decided to see the world. Now, his first trip was over to Europe, spent some time there, and then progressed over to the Philippines. And your time frame, you had about 40 grand, I think you said, when you got here. You were still receiving revenue from the song and the movies and the royalties and all that kind of stuff. So that was supplementing that. But I think at that point in time, what you decided, if I heard you correctly during our conversation, was you were going to take that money, you were going to spend some me time, get out and see the world. You didn't have a bunch of close ties with anyone in particular, from what I understand. And so you were kind of on your own. You came to the Philippines and you came here for 2 weeks. Am I correct?
Right. That was the plan.
That was
2 weeks.
15 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was his plan.
Yeah.
And you guys know my favorite joke. If you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. So what is it about the Philippines that took a 2-week vacation, look-see, and turned it into a 15-year life?
When I got off the plane, I felt like I got out of a time machine. It felt like the 1950s, 1960s. It felt like I was in an episode of Leave It to Beaver, except everyone had cell phones and laptops.
Yeah. When we first started talking, I'm over at Stash's house right now, we both concurred with that. It was one of the first things he shared with me, is he goes, man, I felt like I was back in the 50s. And something I don't think I've ever shared with anybody out on YouTube land is that when I first got here, when I took the cab from the airport to the hotel, I had the exact same feeling. I said, it looks like and it feels like I'm in the 50s. There's gas stations with gas station attendants. I hadn't seen that since I don't know when. I was looking at the kids, and the kids were, a lot of them were wearing school uniforms because that's how they operate out here. And I just remember as a child, I grew up in like a Jewish/Catholic neighborhood, you know? And so kids were dressed up when they went to school. It was a real process, and it was just part of the deal back in the day. And I didn't see any teenagers here with the baggy pants and the slouchy and the rap and this and that and the other. And to me, it was just like I stepped back in time. You had the exact same experience.
Exactly.
And so...
Let me ask you, when you first went into like Robinson's,
Yeah.
and you saw all the sales girls dressed the same way,
Yeah.
wearing the same makeup,
Yeah.
didn't it feel like an old Robert Palmer video?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The word stewardess kept coming up in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, because I still don't understand why you can't say the word stewardess without getting major flack. But that's what also struck me. When I saw the women that work behind the counter, like he's talking about, I thought stewardess, because that's back in the day when you used to fly.
They all looked the same,
and they were all pretty, and they were all young, and it was all part of the sales job to get you on the airplane, as opposed to the job.
Or maybe to keep you on the airplane in case you get afraid and you want to jump out.
So the one operative word that I think you used over here is, when you came to the Philippines, it felt like you were number one on a time machine, but the word family. Came to you.
I saw a family respect that I had not witnessed in the United States for many, many, many years. And when the first little child took my hand and put it to his forehead to bless, I thought, wow, what an amazing habit that is, that they teach these children, or tradition, or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
It just really impressed me and won my heart. And so I extended my 2 weeks a little further to explore this country further. And the more I explored it, the more I fell in love with the country. And when I got out of the big cities and into the provinces and seeing the love, the family, felt more of that family love, caring for older folks, not throwing them in an old folks' home. That it was, I'm sorry, my responsibility is to my grandmother. I have to take care of her.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Where it definitely wouldn't be, of course, if we were in the States.
That's correct.
But I fell in love with that, and that kept me going and kept me meeting more people here and seeing more of the beauty of this place, and amazed at the beauty of the countryside that the people here don't even notice, because this is their normal. But it's not our normal to have, like, I look out my windows and I'm just amazed at what's out there.
Yeah.
And the more I stayed here, the more in love I felt. And then I went down to Mindanao, which was supposed to be very dangerous and don't go there. And it is dangerous. However, the Muslims are smart enough to know that they need to stalk the people they're going to kidnap and kill. They don't just grab you off the streets most times, which made it less dangerous. But I went down there and I met my wife, who's also half Muslim, so she half took me hostage. And then I became young again. I fell in love.
Yeah, so,
Something I wasn't looking for. I see these guys that come here to try to find a girl, and I think the way to find her is not to look for her.
Okay. Well, I don't think you were really looking for a girl when you came over here. I think you came here to look around, and life is what happens when you're busy making other plans and all that good stuff.
That's exactly.
So, a lot of guys I talk to, or people that I interview or join me on the channel, I don't really end up with any kind of like moral or anything at the end of it. But this video, I feel like there's kind of a moral to the story. And
a moral to my amoral life
is what I take away from this, and again, it's just an opinion, but you got a guy that was in the limelight that a lot of people like me would only dream of. I mean, who wouldn't like to be a rock star? Who wouldn't want to hang out with Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Eric Clapton and go on the road and lead that kind of life? Very, very few people get the opportunity to do that. And here's a gentleman that has had the opportunity to do that, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. But you know what? There's seasons to your life. And
Right.
and when you got hurt, and your ankle got shattered, that was probably one of the lower parts of your psyche and life, and laying there in the hospital and the pain and everything. And sometimes it takes those smackdowns to guide us into the proper direction.
Well,
when
I
you-
think of it as life is an adventure, and it takes different turns. You talk about it as being a low point. Low points are not low points. They're points to learn from. They're just another part of the adventure to me.
Amen.
So I don't think that these high points of playing, in front of 50, 60,000 people was anything more than another adventure. That landing in the hospital was another adventure.
Sure.
Stumbling onto being around some of the most famous people in the world was another adventure. I told you earlier that I donate my time to teaching in the schools, teaching the music program.
Right.
And one of the things I tell them right in front, because they're in awe when I get introduced, because they play it up and make me sound like I'm still somebody.
Mm-hmm.
They don't say, and he's a has-been, like you do.
Right.
But
Truth in lending.
one of the things I do, I tell them, look, I was raised in Hollywood, California. Do you know what I had to do to be born in America and raised in Hollywood? You know what I had to do? Absolutely nothing.
I was
That's
born
just
in
where
Hollywood.
God put me.
I was born in Hollywood. I didn't get to be in a movie. I was born in Kaiser Hospital right on Sunset Boulevard.
Well,
I didn't get to be in a movie. I got a crappy little YouTube channel.
but I don't have a YouTube channel today, and you do.
But anyway, I think it, to wrap it up, it's like, what I like about Stash is that this, to me, feels like a guy that's come full circle. In the 50s and the 60s, he was having fun. He had a family. They were his adopted family, if you will. They were musicians. He was having fun. He I'm sure was waking up, relatively satisfied with how things were going. And then here, 50 years later, comes over someplace for 2 weeks, and 15 years later has rediscovered that family and that 1950s vibe.
Yeah, but
And
I want to
to
correct
me,
you for one
Please
second,
do.
and sorry to have to do this,
It's all
but
good.
success is relative.
Yeah.
So when you look at my life from the 60s and 70s and playing in front of thousands and thousands of people and them screaming and throwing their bras at me and panties and stuff like that, that was my work.
Mm-hmm.
That was my work. That wasn't like, oh, this is the high time. This is just what happened day to day in my life. Looking at my life today, and I play in a club, and if let's say I do Bogart and people start going crazy, that's a high point in my life also.
Yeah.
One is not higher than the other because there was more people. Someone like Linda Ronstadt, she loved playing smaller clubs, hated playing the big clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Her success was when she was in the smaller clubs. My success is on a daily basis when I see my kids doing something great, because they are my life now. My wife and my kids, my family that is the life I choose now, which comes before the whole rock and roll thing. So what is success? Success is when we have our family hug.
Yeah.
That to me is a special moment that can't be topped by 50,000 people screaming.
You heard it here. This is from a guy that been there, done that. And at the end of the day, is here in the Philippines, just living like I do, very modestly, kind of a minimalist. He's still able to be passionate about his music. He's still able to pay it forward, helping those that maybe are less experienced. He's giving lessons for free. He plays for free. He plays for the passion of it all. And he's found his family here in little old Philippines, here in little old Dumaguete. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing.
Hey, thank you for having me.
And I was going to ask you a question, but I think we might do like a part 2 or a part 3 or a part 4. We'll see how it goes. And because there's a lot of stuff that I want to get into with you, but my attention span is short, and I know my audience is shorter. We'll see you next time.